Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. If you lived around Massachusetts in the 1980s, you may recognize these ads.
I'm Joe Kennedy. If you need help staying warm, call me at Citizens Energy at 1-877-JOE for oil. We'll get you some heating oil at 40% off from the good people of Venezuela and Citgo. No one should be left out in the cold.
The organization Citizens Energy was a charity set up by Joe Kennedy II, the eldest son of the late Senator Bobby Kennedy. It was created to get discounted heating oil to people in need. Citizens Energy is still around, but it's no longer Joe for oil. Now it's Joe for Sun.
With Joe for Sun, we share electric discounts with low-income families in Massachusetts and New York. Call Joe for Sun. We want to hear from you.
And that's not Joe Kennedy II. It's his son, Joe Kennedy III. You'll remember him from being a 4-term congressman representing Massachusetts. He's now taking a break from elected office, though still involved in politics, and serving as president of Citizens Energy, following in his dad's footsteps. They're no longer just a charity. They now also finance energy projects like solar farms and transmission lines and use the proceeds to lower people's energy bills. The former congressman is here with me in the studio to talk about energy and politics. Welcome.
Shirley, thank you.
I know when the organization was set up, there was sort of a simple mandate. People will call 1-800-JOE for oil, and trucks would literally come bringing heating oil to people who couldn't otherwise afford it. So now you're Joe for Sun. So trucks don't drive up and install solar panels, right? So,
No.
So how does it work?
So first off, thanks for having me. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for bringing this back up. And those ads you referenced are certainly a big part of kind of my young adulthood. So just to back up a little bit, my dad started Citizens Energy back in 1979. Its mission was to help low-income families meet basic needs. And they did so through energy. They did a bunch of stuff all over the world, actually, in Africa and South America and Central America. Had a number of different programs across the country. One of them ended up being this Joe for Oil, this discounted home heating oil program. They did that for about 10 years or so, gave away over $500 million of discounted heating oil to low-income families across nearly 26 states. So at its peak, it was all over the country. Over the course of the past really kind of 15 years or so, under still my dad's leadership there, that program kind of sunsetted and phased out, and they transitioned to this low-income community solar model called Joe for Sun, which, not a marketing genius that made, luckily the letter still worked on the phone number, right? But we are now the largest provider of low-income community solar in Massachusetts and New York. We've got the single largest low-income community solar farm in the country. It's in Southern California.
So you invest in solar farms, right?
Yeah. So we will
not like the panels on my roof.
Not the panels on the roof.
House.
No.
Yeah.
So we build those solar farms. We do a lot of them actually on those old landfills, old dumps, right? Mm-hmm. Those dumps get capped. You put a dirt on top of them. So we'll put solar panels on them. Community solar model, essentially, it's a virtual one. So we take the electricity from that solar farm, and then it connects into a grid, but then we virtually distribute it out to low-income families.
Right. So where are we right now in this kind of energy transition? Are we still very much in the growing pains, moment, or we're past that, or where? How would you characterize this moment?
Surely, I think we're still very much in the kind of a growing pain moment, with the kind of humility of saying, hopefully there's some massive innovations that are not too far around the corner that will revolutionize this moment. But we see that potentially in both directions, right? If we had this conversation 18 months ago, we are probably not having a conversation centered on AI and data centers.
That's right.
That are sending a dramatic spike in energy usage and requiring massive upgrades to our utility system and our energy system. That does kind of take all of these, what were planned investments and what was kind of forecasted out, and just completely alters that model.
Right.
look, if one of our homegrown companies here, right out of MIT, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, is able to create fusion energy, right, which is
Right.
a literally a star in a box, right? If they are able to do that, where it's nuclear energy, it's not the bad nuclear energy, it's a good nuclear energy, and which the byproduct of is like helium and water. So if you're able to do that, there you create essentially an endless energy source.
Yeah.
Is there still a cost to that? Of course, these systems are going to be
It's a game
expensive,
changer.
but it is a game changer. And they're building their prototype space at Fort Devens as we speak,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
we hope they're successful. What do we do if they're not? And what do you do in those intervening years until we get there? And that's where some of this debate comes, because this region is hugely reliant on natural gas. Part of the reason why is we don't want to rely on oil and we don't want to rely on coal, but we need something that carries that base load. Batteries are a ever emerging newer technology that are getting bigger, cheaper, more reliable. Part of this is the technology is moving so quickly. You don't want to build out a system that by the time you build it, it's massively outdated. But you also can't then sit there waiting for technology, hoping that it happens more quickly, while people are, we've been this close to rolling brownouts a couple of times in recent history.
That's right.
And the vast majority of people have no idea that's the case, but this close.
Yeah, very close. And so where are you on data centers? I mean, a lot of states are banning them.
I am not a no to data centers because our society, given the enormous technological leap that is coming, we need to understand, we need to have access to that technology. What that means, though, is that's a very different question than, as we've seen actually in some of the places where another nonprofit I started is doing work, where big data center development companies are coming in, getting elected officials to sign non-disclosure agreements to learn anything about it, can't talk about it publicly.
Right.
There's a project down in Alabama outside of Bessemer, which the entire land value, I think in 2018 of Bessemer, Alabama, was assessed at about $380 million. There's a series of data centers under one project there that's estimated to be $14 billion. And local townspeople are trying to say, and residents of the city are trying to say, well, what does this mean for us? And the city council is under non-disclosure agreement. And if you don't sign an NDA, the company won't tell you anything about it.
Right.
So no one can get information as to what this is going to mean for.
So that's why people want to ban them.
So people, you sit there and go, look, if
Right.
you're telling me that you've got access to the energy so that you don't have to jack up my energy rates,
Yeah.
if you're telling me you're not going to deplete our reservoirs so that you're doing closed loop
Yeah.
water and you're going to recycle this, and if you're telling me that this is going to increase, access to jobs or whatever else in our community, maybe.
Yeah.
If you're not going to tell me any of that, and what we're seeing in some places, not all, is a race by big developers to lock this stuff in as quickly as they possibly can, because these big companies out there are racing and not telling community and putting this cost then back on all of us, right? To say, I don't know, too bad for you on your water, too bad for you on your energy rates, too bad for you on, you thought you were living next to a park, actually you're going to live next to 14 data centers that are the size of Walmart superstores, right? That's not exactly, no, you shouldn't be able to do that. So I'd say this is not a no, but there is a process by which developers should be going through to do that community engagement, where, again, if this is going to be done in your backyard, you would want nothing less.
So President Trump has been rolling back all these Biden-era renewable energy policies and canceling, offshore wind projects, seemingly left and right. And his mantra has been drill, baby, drill. So how much of this is a setback for the renewable energy industry?
Look, it's, I have said before, Shirley, politics and physics don't always align. The laws of physics might be suspended in the short term. In the long run, physics wins, right? So this administration can go bury their head in the sand and say, drill, baby, drill. We're going to take all the oil we can. We're going to go to Venezuela, and then we're going to go to Iran, and we're going to, invade Karg Island, and we're going to take all of it, right? What we've seen from markets and what you've seen from society is just because you are doesn't mean that the physics all of a sudden that climate change no longer exists, or that somehow the laws of, physics have been suspended forever. You're seeing China make very aggressive long-term investments in renewable energy, wind, solar, particularly in battery technology, because they know, one, that climate change is real and there's going to be significant cost in that displacement. Two, they don't want to be dependent on other sources, on external sources for energy and for security as an economic and national security perspective. So they're making massive investments there. It strikes me as I mean, pick your word, insane is probably the nicest one, that given the complexity that we're seeing around the world at the moment, I mean, this president has bombed 8 nations in 14 months, 16 months, right? That we would think the thing to do is to go bet heavier on an oil industry when almost everybody in that oil industry is saying, hey, the future of this, even here, right? The future of this is an integrated grid, distributed generation, leaning into the technologies and the competition around fusion energy and other opportunities that are out there to say, hey, if we can create a sun in a box, if an American company is able to do that, that's $1 trillion company overnight.
Right.
So why are we we should be creating the incentives here to try to facilitate that, which, by the way, was a result of long-term research and development dollars. So invest in that long-term R&D such that in the long term, the United States is in a position to leverage our ingenuity, leverage our research institutions, which this administration is gutting, trying to do the things that are necessary in terms of putting ourselves in a longer-term strategic position rather than mortgaging our future for the sake of a present and then spending all of that money on gas prices.
Yeah.
Like, why? Who thinks that's a good idea? Literally one guy and nobody else.
All right, more of my conversation with Joe Kennedy after a short break. So you were a congressman for 8 years before running Citizens Energy. What are the ways you feel that experience in politics helps you solve problems in the energy sector?
Look, I think on the one hand, it was very good training for it. Politics at its best is about trying to find a way to solve a problem and taking the views of different constituencies into account in order to try to build consensus. The energy industry and the work that we do, Citizens Energy does in energy industry, is very similar, right? It's not enough to say, hey, we want to go build a low-income community solar farm in order to help support low-income families. If you ask folks who's against that? Nobody. We want to do this and cut down your favorite park where you walk your dog every morning. Right. People start to say, well, hey, wait a minute, why here? So I think it starts, what you learn, hopefully, in some of those lessons of politics is to say, everybody's got a perspective. Your job is to try to understand what that perspective is, see if you can kind of get to the interests and the values behind that, and then see if there's a way to shape these to build a consensus to address a challenge that confronts us. Barney Frank had the best definition of government I ever heard, my predecessor. And he said, government is simply the name we give to the things we do together. It's people sitting around a table trying to solve a problem. That's all it is. I like that. It's great. But that is what it is. That's what it's supposed to be. So Citizens, our model is to try to sit down around a bunch of tables and try to get people to say, what do you want? What do you need? What have you heard? What are your concerns? Okay, here's from our perspective, here's what we heard from you. Here's what the reality of the project actually is. Here's what we think these benefits could be. Is there a way to get to yes? And surely not everybody, there's not always a way to get to yes. And you don't have to get every person in every room to yes. But if you go through that process and you treat people with the respect that they deserve as if somebody's building it in your backyard, you oftentimes can find a way to get there, which, by the way, if you can get there, it means there's not people getting arrested outside your facilities. It means there's not protests outside your buildings. It means you're not getting sued, hopefully, day after day after day, prolonging the cost of these projects for years or going up to litigation. So you can actually do this in such a way that gets the support of a community, minimizes the impact, and can help speed along the process, which is one of the biggest costs in an energy world, infrastructure world at the moment to begin with.
So do you miss being in Congress?
Not at all.
No FOMO?
No FOMO. If you believe that our country has real systemic and structural challenges, which I do, Congress and the federal government is the way in which you address them. So, I've got lots of thoughts on that. Yes, I wish our government was functioning better than it is at the moment to be able to address some of those challenges. Was I honored to play a part in that while I was there? Yes. When I talk to my friends that are still there, and it's more and more of them are leaving cycle after cycle because it is a brutal, toxic place. It's less about trying to address those concerns and much more about, kind of government by performance and not diving into some of these larger term structural issues, which ends up, the quality of life for those members. Like you guys had a piece today, I believe, about the threats that are coming into members' offices.
Right.
That started when I was there. me, family members, et cetera. My last campaign, my wife stopped getting the mail because of, threats, and those were actually coming from the left, not the right, which is a whole another issue, right? So it's just like the ugliness of it and the quality of life. I've got young kids. The quality of life outside that world is so much better than the quality of life inside it at the moment, which is a tragedy. And it's sad because you're going to discourage people from trying to do this work in a real, I think, way that it's needed.
So I want to talk about your relationship with your dad. You have parallel careers in many ways, right? Both of you served in Congress, and now you're leading the same organization. Are you surprised to find yourself following in your father's footsteps?
It is not what I was. It's not what I would have expected.
Is it a surprise to him?
That's a good question. I haven't asked. Am I surprised? Yes. But when I got out of office, and then after a year or so, kind of started. He said, "Hey, you should just check out what we're doing here." And I went in and talked to their team. The model at Citizens, the model, particularly around transmission, was way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
20, 30 years ahead of its time. We've been doing this they pioneered that model about 15 years ago. With little fanfare, with great impact. It helps fund that largest community solar farm in the nation. And I turned to him and I said, "Look, I don't think you might not realize what you've got," which is in this huge debate now about permitting and how do we build this stuff and how do we build more quickly, but how do you do it without dramatically increasing costs? Like you've got a model here that actually helps address that in a real and powerful way that treats communities the way they should be treated. Let's scale it. And so I've spent a lot of my time with, of course, like last couple of years, kind of trying to proselytize folks about that model, talk people through it, demonstrate it, and then try to grow it. And hopefully with some of the projects we got in the pipeline, we will.
Right. Do you have any memories when you were young, tagging along with your dad on any Joe for Oil runs?
So the Joe for Oil runs and such happened when I was a little bit older.
Oh,
My dad,
I see.
my dad ran for office when I was 6 and 7, and then left when I was left office when I was basically graduating high school. I would obviously when I would come home from my times overseas or whatnot, and come to his office, like I saw the ads and I saw him on the big oil tanker. I would see him delivering the oil with the truck. I'd heard plenty of those stories. I saw all of the stuff that he had up in his office from it. But surely I do hear now, all the time, actually, kind of when you're walking down the street, if I get stopped, it's tell your dad thanks for the oil. Even all these years later.
Wow.
Because people, when they were signing up for that program, if they did, through our community action agencies in the dead of winter, and like getting a couple $100 off an oil delivery, like that meant a lot to them. And so I still get that, not infrequently. So the fact that people still remember it, obviously, is gratifying, makes me very proud of him, and I think gratifying to him as well.
So I want to talk more about the Kennedy family legacy.
Yay.
You have a very famous uncle in the spotlight right now, RFK Jr. I know you've come out many times to condemn his views on health and science, and you even have called on him to resign as Health and Human Secretaries, Health and Human Services Secretary. So do you find it frustrating to have to sort of answer for your uncle and who you don't agree with a lot of time?
Yeah, look, I think most folks, I think understand that, like, we have a different perspective on this, and so they're not asking me to necessarily answer for him. I think most folks, when you kind of turn around and say, like, if you've got a big family, do you agree with your uncle and everything? The answer is no, right? Look, I have obviously very deep and passionate feelings about the ways in which this administration is damaging lots of the fabric that I hold dear about this country, and that I believe many members of my family helped build in this country. And I believe this administration is destroying it. So, and deliberately so. And is not being honest with the American public about why it's doing what it is. And so, do I love continuing to answer questions about, Bobby or other family members? No. Do I understand they're going to keep coming up? Yes. Do I keep giving the same answer to it? Yeah.
Do you maintain a relationship with your uncle?
Yeah, look, so family is family, and we are still family and always will be.
No Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving.
The details of that, surely I'm going to leave for family. I will say this, right? Like, difficult times in a lot of families these days for political reasons and other things. The one thing that, as a family that has spent considerable time in nation spotlight, sometimes that spotlight's been brighter than others. You realize that there is, no matter what happens, family sticks around. And there's a reason why our family is as tight as we are, is because, even your closest friends don't always do that. There's been lots of books, there's been lots of TV shows, there's more TV shows coming out now about, with sources of folks close to the Kennedy family. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't, right? Like the stuff that you see out there, it's historical fiction. It's used for entertainment. It is not an accurate reflection of our family or anything else, right? It is used that is bait used to get eyeballs and clicks. It is frustrating to know that somebody's exploiting your family for that, but that's happened for years and years and years, and that's going to keep happening. But I will tell you, and there's a reason, I've read one book on one family member, and I've never read another one, and I never will. Because even the best journalists with the purest intentions, that journalist is going to get, the juiciest parts of those stories are going to be him getting details or her getting details around the dinner table that maybe I was at or maybe I wasn't. But you're putting that writer, editor, producer, publisher in between, and a series of people in between me and a family member. And they don't deserve to be there. Those relationships are relationships that I know what it's like growing up as part of that family.
Can you say what book it is?
I read one book. I was a Peace Corps volunteer way back when in the Dominican Republic, and I was my uncle, Senator Kennedy, Teddy, was in what turned out to be his last campaign. They asked if when I came back, because I was coming back and needed something to do before law school started, they said, "Do you want to help manage a campaign?" I said, "I mean, sure, I'd love to, right? Been around campaigns for a long time, happy to work on it." They said, "Great, he's got 60 years of history here. Here's the fact sheet." So they gave me a book on kind of his legislative record, so I could read it.
This is Senator Ted Kennedy. Yeah, when he was a senator.
When he was a senator. So I could read some of the stuff they'd actually done, which was
that was the only book you read?
That was the only book I've ever read.
And then you stopped.
Because, again, and there are plenty of journalists who I admire that have written books on our family, and that's great. Even those whom I admire, that's them, again, editor, publisher, et cetera, between me and my grandmother, between me and I never got to meet my grandfather, but between me and them. And that is the perspective that they're going to have off of a source that is going to have a different perspective, or off of a letter that is going to be their best effort as to divining what they mean. And if you're talking about the relationship you have with your grandmother, you're not going to let four people in between that. Right. Right. That is a personal thing for you. And most people would say, why if you're going to take the word of a word of the word of the word of somebody else about that relationship, no, you wouldn't. So I don't. Do I understand that, again, whatever's happening on these other shows, which I will not name, is going to get, they're going to highlight, controversy and salaciousness and whatever else.
Why do you think the public is still fascinated with the Kennedys after all these years?
That's a good question. I think, look, I think to some extent, the part of my family means different things to different people. And if you spend any time in public life, you realize that very quickly.
Some people, it's still oil. Thanking you for oil.
Some people, it is still a recognition that, at least from my interpretation, right, my family's history in this country comes from deep levels of exploitation and deprivation in Ireland, and that they, a couple of very young people fled in the midst of a famine, came here, and were met with extraordinary amounts of discrimination. And the guy that showed up here, Patrick Joseph Kennedy, died young, and his wife, Bridget Murphy, had to raise a bunch of kids all on her own in Maverick Square in East Boston. And none of that was easy, and it was incredibly difficult. And I can't even imagine what they went through. And it was subject to the same level of discrimination that every other Irish family was through. But those stories have been passed down to succeeding generations of our family. That immigrant story is one that I think we hold quite dear. the story of a young man that was able to overcome all sorts of, various roadblocks and prejudice about his faith to be able to become president of the United States, and sought to inspire, use his very gifted, rhetoric and oratorical skills to inspire people to try to make a difference in their communities, is a message that I think still does resonate. The other aspects of this, are what they are. I recognize what's happening, and I can't control that, and you make peace with it. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it, like I've got choice words for those folks that think that that's a good way to make a living, but that's their choice.
So talk to me about your future in politics.
I noticed you said I was taking a break. I think that's a long break, but thank you.
I mean, do you see yourself running for office again?
The political answer, I guess, but I have no plans to do that. I struggle to see what would change in. I guess I would say this.
You got your friends leaving Congress.
My
right?
friends are leaving Congress, and the saddest ones are still the ones that are still there, I guess. My kids are 8 and 10, and I like them and they like me, at least for now. So I didn't want to
wait till they're teenagers.
I was going to say I want to absorb that as long as I can until I'm thrown out. Right?
Mine are 13 and 15, barely talking to me.
Yes.
Mom, stop talking.
Exactly. Well,
my head hurts.
I get that already. Right. And my wife still likes me, I think, but you can ask her, right? So I was gone a lot. I was gone for half their lives, for my kids' lives, when I was in office, and I'm not looking to replicate that anytime soon. I also have been very, very fortunate to have been able to work at a place like Citizens Energy, to be able to wrestle with some of these issues that I couldn't wrestle with in the same level of depth and detail when I was in office, because you were pulled in so many different directions. And so, look, I think, if we are able to make the contribution I hope that we are able to make with Citizens Energy and give away tens of millions of dollars a year to low-income families, help transform the way in which we think about infrastructure investment in this country to benefit local communities, that's a pretty good way to spend a day. So happy to do it, and, we'll see what happens, but I'm in no hurry to get back to that mess.
Joe Kennedy III is the president of Citizens Energy Corporation and former congressman representing Newton. Thanks for coming into the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.